Hello and welcome. My name is Adam and I'm a member of the Future Leaders Community Steering Group. This session is second based on psychological safety and how, as future leaders, we can be successful in building safe behaviours and habits and how this contributes to a positive safety culture. When starting in health and safety, it can be challenging and often confusing what is needed, how to successfully build, implement, and maintain safe behaviours and create the environment which employees feel safe, particularly as there is a lot of theory around the subject. In this session, myself and Darren Sutton explored some of the basics of psychological safety, the importance of self-talk and our inner voice, and explored the KISS model, which was keep, improve, stop, and start. Today, I'm joined by Professor Tim Marsh, an author of books, papers, and articles on psychological and behavioural safety, and one part of the Anchor and Marsh consultancy, who specialise in minimising risk and making change. Tim is well known for being the first to lead the first behavioural team outside of the USA in the 1990s and ran open courses on behavioural safety on behalf of IOSH. Tim, please could you provide a bit more information on yourself and some of your work?
Thank you, Adam. Yes, so I was one of the team leaders of the behavioural safety research out of Manchester University, HSC funded back more than 30 years ago now. And from there, started working in safety leadership. Behavioural safety takes you straight to safety leadership. Safety leadership takes you pretty much straight to safety culture. And safety culture is just a subset of culture, which we're about to discuss. So, and I've worked up, and back in the 1990s, if people thought you knew something about behavioural safety, you got to spend the next 10 years on an oil rig, essentially. So I've travelled the world doing this stuff, and as you said, written some books and some papers and given some talks. But probably the most interesting thing from your point of view is before I did that, my doctoral thesis was looking at suicides in the army. And so for me, the world of health and safety has turned full circle, and I'm pretty much back where I started, talking about psychological safety and not how you would apply principles of that to behavioural safety.
Oh, thanks so much for that introduction, Tim. It's absolutely a fascinating subject, and it's one that we absolutely need to look at and kind of get right, and really just try to break down to the basics level. So, can you tell us more about the psychological safety then, and how that affects you and your work, and how we can look at it as future leaders?
Okay, well that's too many questions, Adam. If you don't, well, I'll start with the first one, which is what is psychological safety, and psychological safety is really being comfortable complaining, being comfortable pointing out that you think people have made mistakes, are saying the wrong thing, are doing the wrong thing, challenging the status quo, admitting, and also being comfortable admitting to mistakes, admitting to weakness, admitting to needing help, and feeling comfortable raising those issues. That's in essence, that's what psychological safety is.
So in terms of your own work then, and things that you've explored in health and safety, could you describe a bit more about that?
Well, I'd say, I mean, my work has been in safety culture, behavioural safety, safety leadership, but the overlap with psychological safety is really interesting because, we all know culture is king. I mean, it's long been accepted now, culture is king, and changing it is difficult. But what makes a really good culture, that three things make a really good culture. The first is you've got your systems, your procedures, your inductions, your training. You've kind of hit diminishing returns with that. And then two things underpin that and really push you towards excellence. The first is a really good learning approach. So you can cross-reference with Andrew Hopkins' mindful safety concept, where he says all organizations are chock full of problems. The best organizations proactively go and find out what they are. The weaker organizations reactively wait for the problems to find them. So there's that key element of proactive learning. And obviously we need to start talking about just culture, HSG 48 at this point, and maybe we will later in the discussion. The second element is the bottom up, so top down and bottom up. The bottom up bit is empowerment and engagement, discretionary effort, all that stuff that means that people are switched on. They come to work, heads up, engaged, keen to be there, enjoying their work. That gives you all sorts of benefits of mental health, of course. Good work is good for you. And it also gives you all sorts of other KPIs that suddenly have become incredibly important, like less turnover of your best staff, particularly less absenteeism, less presenteeism, more discretionary effort. all the things that many organizations are suddenly, including UK PLC, you know, the chancellor saying, please come and work. Don't stay at home on the golf course watching daytime TV, come back to work. You know, all the things that suddenly are becoming incredibly important. You know, some companies out there still have an incredibly robust business model. They make trillions regardless. But for lots of others, suddenly these soft KPIs are becoming incredibly important.
Oh, it's really interesting. Thank you for that. Just touching on something that you mentioned, just about people feeling comfortable and being able to sort of say what they want to say and be the ones to make those complaints. So just thinking about accountability and the politics within sort of organizations, how does that affect the psychological safety and work against or towards?
Adam, if you don't mind, I'll try and swerve it with an example that I know is reasonably non-contentious. And with reference to a couple of classic TV programs, because we know this is a world of pain. If I start talking about this, I'm bound to say the wrong thing for somebody, so I'll try not to. So a friend of mine, a guy called Ian Pulston Davis, used to play a guy called Owen Armstrong in Coronation Street, and I know Ian from the world of mental health. We've worked together and given joint presentations and so on. And Ian suffers really badly from OCD. And so, you know, so we're talking diversity. You know, he's got mental health issues. He's very open about it. And one of his OCDs is he can't sit down. He's convinced that every time he sits down, he's going to break his spine. So the example I often give is, if you were an avid Corrie fan, you will have seen Ian as Owen 1,000 times. Stood at the bar of the Rovers, stood in the doorway of his kitchen talking to his family. You know, chatting away, arguing with them, all the rest of the stuff. Two things I often say. Number one, in all the time that you watched him, you probably thought he was a really strong character. Everybody liked Owen. They thought he was a strong character. Number two, you never even noticed that he was never ever sat down. You know, and so that's an example of an adjustment that works. You know, he was still a strong character. He contributed to the series, but he was able to make an adjustment. And then, cross-referencing to another famous Manchester program, accountability is it's reasonable for Ian to ask to never sit down in a scene, because that's a reasonable adjustment. You know, always sitting down in a scene because you can't be asked to stand up, to quote Jim Royle, isn't reasonable. You know, so there is still accountability. You still get to be on the receiving end of constructive feedback. You know, models like biff off, you know, this is your behavior, this is what I want in the future, you know, and say that twice, and then all the following will happen, biff off. You know, you still get to be subject to that, but, adjustments and diversity should be accounted for whenever it's viable, whenever the suggestion that comes through delivers a high impact solution, not one that makes absolutely everybody comfortable at all times. But
that's quite fascinating.
Now it's getting too dangerous and difficult there. So I'll stop with my Jim Royle quote.
No, it's a very interesting point, and I think it's one that, again, as future leaders and those who come into the profession, we sort of battle with a little bit and understand, you know, at what level can we continually say yes and push boundaries, as well as then ones where we're trying to obviously create something or trying to encourage others to then speak up, but obviously then can't fulfill necessarily every requirement. So that's quite a good sort of example there.
You can give me an example if you like, but I'm just going to say no comment.
So with psychological safety and sort of the building of it, is this something easy to create? Is this something that future leaders can achieve?
This is one of the short questions. No. Short answer to that question, no, it's not. No. Next question.
Thinking about then the outcomes. So obviously this is going to be a challenge. This is something that, you know, you've got to look at organizationally. It's not something that can happen sort of straight away. But as future leaders, if we're really trying to sort of talk to, you know, senior leaders, managers, you know, the ones running the organization from the top, what outcomes, what are the benefits that we can really start to sort of sell to them to get them to buy into it?
Well, I know that no, you know, obviously there's a flippant answer before. It's, you know, no, because it's culturally based and changing culture is notoriously difficult. What are the benefits though? You know, if because there's a huge overlap, I think, between safety culture strength and psychological safety. You know, and you often say, look, you'll never see an organization with poor safety culture that's probably got a strong psychological safety culture, and vice versa. If you've got a strong safety culture, you've almost certainly got a strong psychological safety culture, because the two things go hand in glove. Sometimes you can see an organization with really strong safety scores, but with weak psychological safety because nobody reports anything and everything's suppressed. But what are the benefits? Well, the benefits of a strong culture. You've probably hit diminishing returns because you're really good at learning and evolving. So you've probably hit diminishing returns with your systems, your procedures, your training. You've probably got a very strong learning culture. So the organization as a whole have swallowed Matthew Said's Black Box Thinking, which is the best book written about safety in the last 30 years, if you ask me. And they'll have a whole bunch of really switched on, engaged, heads up, situationally aware people working for them who are pleased to work for them, who give of their best, give you discretionary effort on the day, don't take too much time off, and talk well about you in the pub, which helps with recruitment of new people and so on. So that's what you get if you get it right.
No, and it's guess it's the safety utopia that we all are aspiring to, or we hope would, be there.
Aiming for, Adam, we're aiming for.
Absolutely. Yeah, aiming for sure. So what are the things that we can do to start to really increase psychological safety then? What's the groundwork that we can put together?
Well, the two things really. I think the first thing is to set the right tone. I do it because I say so. Hasn't really worked with most of us since we were 6. So that communication piece, this is what we're trying to do. This is why we're trying to do it. These are the benefits to me and you, and you can kind of cross-reference, if you like, with safety differently. And the core of safety differently is, look, I want you to make me lots of money whilst not hurting yourself and really enjoying your job. What do you need from me? It's exactly the same principle, isn't it? So it's communicating honestly and openly with lots of transparency and a fair degree of adult to adult communications and so on, just to set the scene. That's the first thing. The second thing is then to set up systems and procedures and opportunities for people to contribute. Now, the most obvious way is just to listen to them, really, and then setting up things like the walk and talk, where you systemically go out onto the shop floor and have structured conversations where you basically say, I like safety differently and a few other things like, is there anything slow or inconvenient about doing this job safely? Is there anything stressing you? Is there anything I can do to, and are you tired? All those things about the individual, or more systemic things, like behavioral root cause analysis teams. I've always felt that was the very strongest of all the behavioral methodologies, even better than observing and scoring. But saying to the workers, look, what's going wrong. What's going wrong? Why is it going wrong? Or what can we do about it? And if it's a high impact, low cost solution, then it's done. If it's high impact, high cost, then it's on the table. And, but what we're not going to do is all the knee jerk nonsense, put everybody through training a second time in the hope that it works better this time round. And so on, and I think in your podcast with Darren, and I believe he'll cover KISS in that. It's just that systemic approach of saying to people, what do you think? What do you know? What do you think? What should we do? And obviously you can back that up with all sorts of things like active listening skills, assertion techniques, how to give negative feedback in a way that is non-impactful in a positive, not negative way, by using biff off, for example, I think we described, so on and so forth. I think Darren also talks about, that internal voice, getting the words right, and so a quick jump to psychological safety and a strong culture. We know that if you say to people, I want this job doing safely, but by Friday, that means by Friday, just like you're a really nice guy and I really enjoyed dating you, but that sentence is always going to end badly, so we constantly strive with, you need to say safely and by Friday. And if that's a problem, what I need you to do is sit around the table with me and we'll talk it through. We'll get a Coke and a Mars bar and we'll talk it through. And you get a really good suggestion and an understanding of the issue, and you get to treat people like adults and they get to feel respected, and we're pointing at psychological safety. So there are little techniques that you can train in workshops. So the Dalai Lama, for example, he's taught himself to not say, today, this guy is this guy is normally great, but today he's really winding me up. Not that the Dalai Lama talks like that, but you know what I mean. Because that's going to point you at antagonism and criticism and blame. He's taught himself to say, well, today he's really winding me up, but he's normally all right. And that's going to point me at empathy and understanding and a good quality dialogue. And so there's a whole bunch of stuff we can do and we can train, whether it's training in techniques like that, or just basically good old-fashioned behavioral root cause analysis teams or stress analysis teams, or Darwin's basic model of KISS. I think he talked about, what we're going to keep, what we're going to improve, what we're going to start, what we're going to stop. It's just a systematic filleting of the workforce's knowledge and needs. And of course, this is where diversity comes in, because for each individual, the answer might be different. The need might be different. Or, Ian needs to stand up all the time. Other people might, and so on and so forth.
I think there's a lot of things to absolutely take away from that. And I think there's a lot of good sort of opportunities for a bit of reflection from us all, really, to sort of go, what are the skills that we use and what are the techniques what you're using and where can we best implement them? And, I think what Darren mentioned as well about kind of the low sort of hanging fruit and then the ability to work upwards potentially on some of the more harder things, as you said, high cost, high effort, or, things that are just going to take a little bit more than kind of just, yes, we can do that straight away, or we can change this because you've given us that feedback. So I think there's a lot of great stuff there. Thanks so much, Tim. Just thinking about sort of then others around us then. So obviously psychological safety is quite a personal thing for some, but where management and peers, where do they come into effect and sort of change?
Yeah, one of the questions we talked about before this, Adam, you asked me, you said, well, is it the same? And obviously the management role is all about giving constructive feedback in a user-friendly way. It's about having an open door policy that doesn't come with a force field, and so on and so forth. With peers, it's really interesting. It's slightly different. We know very well from work on culture that it's your peers you look to first, and all that stuff about, you can tell anybody anything in a briefing, put them in the back of a van with a bunch of experienced people, and they'll have gone native by lunchtime. So it's incredibly important that we work with peers too, because you can, so obviously top down, bottom up with mental health. If you have your CEO stand there and say, I too have suffered, I'm going to talk about it, I want you to talk about it, that's incredibly strong. But if what happens is you talk about it, everybody just takes the mick out of you, you won't. So a really good safety example would be, I think, Deepwater Horizon, where the guy who kept making the issue, look, what this reading, I'm not comfortable with this reading. So that's just a bladder effect, that is. And it says in Andrew Hopkins' classic book about it, I think, Disastrous Decisions, it says, his ongoing concerns were met with robust humor. So he stopped. And you know exactly what happened there. And it's exactly the same, if you can get a culture where people will talk, and if you have a concern, they will listen. We're talking in the back of a van or in a canteen now. That is a hugely important element of psychological safety. The culture, we set from the top, driven by the top, but actually on a day-to-day basis, it's manifest in canteens and vans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, that's where maybe the opportunities for future leaders, and as you said before about kind of doing the walking round and the talking, can actually happen a bit better rather than some of the shop floor where people are on guard potentially if, again, that culture or that other sort of area doesn't feel that safe to them or where they feel comfortable potentially. So
absolutely.
In terms of sort of strategy and operational then, so, there's a big picture for an organization. You've alluded to it earlier on. It's about kind of, an organization is there to make money. How does psychological safety fit and sit within those two areas?
Oh yeah, I mean, this is the classic thing, isn't it, about senior management strategy and vision and actual operational requirements and practicalities and realities on the day. So it's very easy for a CEO and a C-suite to say, look, we really want lots of psychological safety. We're absolutely just listen to this chat waffling on about how it'll give us good safety figures as well, safety figures as well as psychological safety. Everything's excellent. But operationally, that means change. And we've always known that operations hate change. Of course they do. They're already flat out. They've already got no resource. So asking for something else is always a problem for them. And that's where management resolve comes in, where the senior management really need to say, right, and it's just, but it goes up, doesn't it? Okay, we've asked you for this as well. We were talking about the whole senior management, frontline management piece. And, one of the things that we've learned from safety excellence that absolutely applies to psychological safety, because this mental health stuff and psychological safety, organizations are in grave danger of making the same mistakes they made with poor quality behavioral safety, which is, you try and treat it like a magic bullet. You put everybody through a training course, or even worse, just a briefing, and then you expect them to go and change. And, what we found over the years and lots of experience now is it's incredibly easy to write a course, very interactive, full of interesting, useful stuff, get fantastic happy sheet scores, and then the organization doesn't follow up and embed. And, if you go to the Harvard Business Review and other learned journals that talk about this stuff, they say something like 80 to 90% of the efficacy of a training course is in the way it's followed up and embedded. So that's following up to see how people are getting on, extra coaching, advice, guidance, all that kind of feedback loop stuff. And this will be exactly the same as people start rolling out psychological safety training. It's not about the training, it's about the way the organization follows it up and embeds it. And that needs proper funding and proper effort. So it'll, they'll start, lots of organizations will get that wrong. They always do.
Oh, that's brilliant, Tim. Thank you so much for that. It's been a really, really informative session. And again, thank you for that. I think there's a lot of things to take away for anybody, entering the IOSH profession, or who are currently, progressing through from whichever role they are. What we're going to do is have a couple of the actual things that we've talked about as a takeaway for the end of the slide as well, just so that's an opportunity for people really to just capture what it is that you've talked about today, because again, it's been fantastic. Is there any sort of final words from you then, Tim?
Yeah, if I could, and I'd finish with a really user-friendly TED Talk. TED Talks are always a good place to go. And there's a Scandinavian chap, there's a TED Talk about the cocktails. A lot of the advances in psychology in the last 20 years are about front brain, back brain, and it's all about, when we first started talking about thinking fast, thinking slow, there was like a 50-50 thing we assumed, lots of subconscious stuff and lots of conscious stuff. The latest figures, again, Harvard Business Review and so on, 94% subconscious. Huge amounts of instinct and very little thinking. And, I won't name the politicians I'm thinking of that people voted for that perhaps they shouldn't have done. But the TED Talk it's a really interesting way. He calls it this cocktail, the cocktails, the angel and the devil's cocktails, he calls it. And he says, look, the devil's cocktail is cortisol and so on. And it's all that stuff that's instinctively caused by being treated unfairly, organizations full of blame, organizations full of one-way communication, and all that sort of stuff. And it's what it automatically gives you, of course, is lack of discretionary effort, intolerance, criticism, hiding things, a whole bunch of negative stuff. And because of all that, you get a weak culture. And because of that, you get poor mental health, higher levels of turnover, lower levels of diversity, and more accidents. Because people aren't thinking clearly and they aren't coming up with creative and constructive solutions to problems. So he says, what you really want is the angel's cocktail, and that's serotonin and all that good stuff. And that's caused by humor, dialogue, being involved, being respected, low levels of blame, higher levels of fairness, all that good stuff. And again, we can go straight back to HSG 48 now and say 9 times out of 10 when things go wrong, it's the organization, not the person. You need to reflect that in the way you respond and all the stuff that perhaps your team will be very familiar with. But what that automatically gives you is creativity, openness, honesty, involvement, tolerance, higher levels of discretionary effort, which kind of covers a whole bunch of that, better mental health, and of course, fewer accidents, because we're all talking and thinking, which is the absolute epicenter of excellent culture, and culture is king. So really, this psychological safety stuff, it's nothing new. There are organizations, there are organizations out there with excellent psychological safety, never even heard the term, let alone try to implement it. It's just a subset, a key element of cultural excellence generally. And some organizations do that without any reference to Amy Edmondson, key books, key theories at all. They just do an awful lot of good quality listening to their workforce and give them the opportunity to contribute, and let all these terms take care of themselves.
I mean, that's a brilliant ending there, Tim. Thank you so much for that. And obviously, anybody can have a search just for that TED Talk and find out a bit more about the two cocktails and how they actually work together, don't work together, and which one you actually do want to be looking for. And it's always great that someone like yourself, Tim, as well, is here to encourage future leaders to learn more about psychological safety, but also really understand their own organizations and what cultures are there, and then how they can start to really look at that. So thank you again, Tim. Much appreciated.
Yeah, you're very welcome, Adam. Thank you for inviting me on.